Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Research 411, a talk show focused on sharing best practices and trending research topics delivered by professional staff and prominent UT Dallas researchers from various disciplines. I am Tiffany Willoughby, Education Programs Outreach and Events Manager in the Office of Research Integrity and Outreach. I will be your host today. Joining me are your presenters, Amanda Boone, Institutional Review Board Director in the Office of Research Integrity and Outreach, and Kerry Tate, Director in the Office of Student Accessibility. Together, they'll discuss human subjects research and student accessibility. Welcome, Amanda and Kerry. Kerry, please tell us a little about yourself, your role in the Office of Student Accessibility, and how you support the UT Dallas community.
Thank you. I am Kerry Tate. The Office of Student Accessibility is the Director for Office of Student Accessibility, and we provide all the accommodation for academics, events, for students, anything that's related to a student's accommodation need on campus. We also do housing as well as for dining. The purpose of our meeting today, or our presentation to you today, is to talk about some of the ethical guidance of when you are working with students with people with disabilities, or it's not necessarily students, but just individuals with students with disabilities, and how they can be a vital information for your research, but also what is the ethical responsibilities that we have throughout the research process. I'm going to turn over to Amanda Boone to talk a little bit about what her role is and also about informed consent.
Thank you, Kerry. My name is Amanda Boone, and as Tiffany mentioned, I am the director of the Institutional Review Board office here at UT Dallas. And our office really is interested in we're tasked with looking at all research projects that involve human subjects, collecting data from the human subjects, or using like biological samples, data that was collected for other purposes, those types of things. There are some very specific regulations, federal regulations, that apply to human subjects research, as well as state laws, all kinds of fun things like that our office is really looking at the research to make sure that it really complies with all of those laws, regulations put in place to help protect human participants in the research projects. One of the things that Kerry kind of touched upon is that individuals with disabilities are an important part of our society, a part of population. And even if you're not conducting a research study that is specifically targeting people with disabilities, or a population that might have a disability, they're in society and they're part of our population. And so it's important to be mindful of that and just have that information be ready for a participant if they need some help with something to understand. One of the key principles of human subjects regulations is that people need to be able to understand the study. They need to be able to really understand what's going on, what they're going to be asked to do, what their data is going to be used for. And one of those key elements is that informed consent process. If you have somebody who maybe has a hard time reading small print, or if you have somebody who might not be able to hear as well as another person, there might be some things that you can do as a researcher to help them along with that, to make sure that they really do understand what it is that's going on. And so Kerry can kind of talk about some of those tips for the informed consent.
And one thing that we need to remember is that the core value for research, and you also want to make sure you promote the well-being of those participants involved or affected by the research process. the respect of dignity, autonomy, equality, and diversity of all those individuals that are involved in the research process. The dignity is to uphold the person's multiple and interdependent rights and interests. You may have to alter the way you provide that information to them, but you need to make sure that it's not a watered down version. It's just that you may need to have a sign language interpreter involved in that to deliver that information, but you will use the same terminologies that you would use with anyone else. If the person does not understand, most likely they will ask you a question. The autonomy, take it seriously when they're really making their own decisions on the research process. Support it. One thing is that mental capacity is one area that I think people forget, that individuals with disability are not affected intellectually in most cases, and if there is, you still treat them the same as you would anybody else. And that is one thing that you've got to be able to make sure that whatever you're measuring is that if it is affected by the disability, that you reach out to the IRB or to the Office of Research so that we can help counsel you with those individuals. Also, when you get ready to, if you do have a subject that has a disability that needs accommodation, and you're concerned about the accommodation being of a cost to the research, please consult with the Office of Research and with the IRB, because that cannot be a factor that can be put in if the cost is because they're being eliminated because of cost of an accommodation that needs to be made. Also, make sure when you're working with your staff on doing informed consents, or also to bring in a diversity group such as disability, reach out. You have services on our campus that can come and do some disability awareness training. Also reach out to the Office of Research, because if it is not just our particular area, there are other areas on campus that deal with a large population of disability, and it may be specific to that need of your research. Amanda, do you have anything that you would like to pipe in with that?
Well, I think you talk about interpreters and that, but there are other things that might help if an interpreter isn't needed. What is important is when you're going through that informed consent process, that you, whoever is conducting that, is mindful and has a good way of kind of reading an individual. There are people who might not feel comfortable saying, I don't understand. And if that is the case, it could happen with any population. It's just important to, when you're conducting that informed consent process, to make that participant feel comfortable so that they can admit, hey, I didn't understand that. Or if they have already gone and signed the consent form and you're going along the procedures and it doesn't really kind of feel like they really understood, then maybe you need to go back to that informed consent process and do it again. But there are things that maybe you don't have to hire an interpreter or things like that. Maybe it's just I need to use a larger font or a different color of paper, or there are tips that we can give you to help with making sure that the participant who wants to be in your study can actually participate. Kerry did kind of talk about the exclusion criteria. And so anytime that you're doing a human subject research study, you'll need to submit an application to the IRB office and have that reviewed by the IRB. And one of the sections in that is the inclusion and the exclusion criteria for the study. And so what are the specific traits of a person that might not be appropriate to be in your study? And that could be pretty much, it could be a list of anything. Some researchers don't want to include left-handed people because there are certain things with left-handed people. Their brain works a little bit differently than right-handed individuals. So there are certain things, as long as the science makes sense, and that's what the IRB reviewers are going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at, why are you excluding people? What is that based off of? And is there a scientific reason for that? Does it make sense for what it is that you want to study? And if it does, and if you can justify it, fantastic. If it doesn't make sense, or if you have excluded somebody and then the IRB looks back at that application and that wasn't an approved exclusion, then that's where some issues are gonna come up, and you're now not compliant with the application that was approved.
I apologize for the interruption, but I do have a question that has been posed, ladies. How soon should I contact the Office of Student Accessibility when considering human subjects research? And should I contact the Office of Student Accessibility or the Institutional Review Board first?
Well, I would, and I'll let Kerry talk to the accessibility office question, but I would say it would depend on who you want to study. So if you are wanting to look at people with, hearing disabilities, maybe it'd be a good idea to contact the accessibility office first, or contact the IRB office and the accessibility office at the same time. And hey, I want to study this. I want to and look at these particular participants. If you contact the IRB office, we will likely give you Kerry's name and say it's a good idea and I recommend that you reach out to Kerry. But if you are just doing a study with the population at large, it's a good idea to talk with her and somebody in her office to kind of, hey, what are the best, if I run into somebody who might need assistance, what would you suggest? But I think in that case, you would contact the IRB office first.
I would recommend that you do both. You could also reach out to us first, and then you can also CC to Amanda or to the IRB, so that we just have a kind of a record of going through. And it may be that you're trying to choose a location to interview that is accessible and safety, but also remember too that we need to kind of build in confidentiality. Just so that you understand, when confidentiality of anyone with a disability has to be treated the same as like with their name through research. And so if you do have a sign language interpreter that is going to be used, there are some measures that we will need to put in so that the individual's name is not disclosed to the interpreter. And the interpreter is also bound by ethical guidelines as well. And that they cannot discuss anything that their clients that they're working with. So those are some things that we can talk to you about, general thing. But by all means, we do want you to reach out if you are going to be doing some kind of a research, or you need to find out you're in the process of even writing a research protocol and would like some guidance on that, on use of verbiage. What's the best way to use verbiage for using people with disability. And that is one thing that we have had to make some corrections on, is that blindness is a broad word. Deafness is a broad word. So whatever you're targeting in your research, if for low vision, what is your range on your low vision? You need to have kind of a range so that you have a cutoff point. Same way like with hearing. or someone that maybe has physical disability.
I do have an additional question, and Amanda, I believe that you are queued up to take this one. When and where does the consenting process take place?
That's actually a really great question. In everything I say, I know people who ask me questions just get frustrated because they'll say it depends, but it does. It depends on the type of study that you are conducting and the type of population that you're looking at. I will say that the common thread between that is going to be, it needs to be a private place where you can have a one-on-one conversation with that participant. You can kind of develop a rapport with that individual so that they really do have that space to ask those questions that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable if the other people were around or if there was something going on in the background. So it's really important that it is a one-on-one conversation and that it feels like a conversation. Don't just hand the form and say, read it, okay, you've signed it, you understand. It really should be a back and forth conversation, and the IRB has recently required that there be comprehension questions built into that process, and so that kind of helps facilitate a dialogue. So you've read, we've gone through this process. Can you tell me the main point of this? What will you be doing? If you don't feel comfortable, what should you do? Those types of things to kind of help build that conversation.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it. Another question that has come in for our talk show today is, what type of research is currently taking place at UT Dallas with students with disabilities?
Well, we have two of the main research areas, I would say, would be, if you look at the Collier Center, you have cochlear implants, and there are individuals who are looking both at children and adults with cochlear implants and hearing aids. There is also, we are very fortunate at UT Dallas. We have a large autistic population. I think larger than is typical for universities and campuses. So we are very fortunate in that way. And we do have some researchers who really do focus on autism and both in children and at the college age and later adulthood. So those, I would say, were the two main areas that we are looking at. And then we do have, just a study will pop up here or there where, maybe they want to look at people with low vision or people who have difficulty hearing because they're trying to develop something, an application that would really assist those populations.
Also, too, anyone can be in the research. So you may have someone that comes into the research that later tells you that they may need some accommodation, and that accommodation could be maybe that the area is not as accessible to them, and that will be the only thing that will be of need for that research. So a lot of times we do have a lot of people that do have disabilities that participate in research, but they may not necessarily need to disclose that. And so to kind of also back up a little bit, is that it's about 10% of your population that has a disability of some sort. It can be something that later in life, it could be something that they're are born with, or it could be an injury. But when you look at the institution and you kind of get an idea about how many people with disabilities are on our campus with students, you take about 10% of the population. However, maybe 1 or 2% will only need accommodations in the housing or dining or into the academic area. And so we have about 2,000 students that we provide accommodation to that have identified to our office. It is up to the individual to identify if they have a disability or not, or need accommodation. We are very, very fortunate at UT Dallas, as Amanda has said. We have a large population of students that are on the spectrum or the spectrum disorder of autism. And we have around about 600 students that have some form of being on the spectrum. It may also be their primary or it may be their secondary. But we do have, we're probably one of the largest across the nation right now for is the amount of students that have identified being on the spectrum requiring accommodations in the classroom or in housing or dining.
And ladies, if I can interject another question, can you give Amanda an example of a recent study approved by the IRB where there were individuals excluded for scientific reasons?
Absolutely. One I gave earlier was left-handedness. I think there are some individuals researching where they're looking at the brain and how the brain activity is during certain conditions, and they're doing EEGs or they're doing some other measure where the brain acts differently if you're left-handed for whatever reason. And I don't understand that, but it is a commonly known thing scientifically. You can also have people who are excluded. Let's say I want to look at domestic abuse, and I want to look at women who are abused domestically. That's not really a scientific, but it speaks to the question that I have on hand, is that I'm looking specifically at how X affects women who have experienced domestic abuse, or I'm looking at pregnancy issues, and that would, of course, eliminate all of the guys out there because they can't get pregnant. So there are certain things that it just has to make sense for the research question that you're asking, and it has to, either scientifically or just, it's not possible for us to include male individuals just because we're looking at the female body kind of thing.
Thank you, Amanda. I believe this next question will be directed to Kerry. While we have a diverse population at UTD, what percentage have disabilities, and are they considered a vulnerable population? If so, why?
It kind of relates to what I just mentioned before. Is that we do have a population that is diverse on campus. And as I said, we have about 2,000 students that have identified to our office with the disability in our office. That does not mean that we have more out there. We are in the process of doing some, where we will send out a survey to everyone to kind of get an idea about how many individuals are on campus that have a disability but not necessarily need accommodation. It is diverse on campus. Remember too that disability is the largest diversity. It is the majority out of the minority. It affects anyone at any time, any race, any religion, any ethnicity. It affects every population that is out there. And while there are some people that we are seeing a larger number of individuals that are starting to come into our office that are international students, which we're really thrilled about, because a lot of countries do not have the same equal rights that we do here in the United States. And so also they may not disclose in their own country. And so it takes them a while to get adjusted to the changes here in the United States. Anyone that is on U.S. soil is covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, which means that it allows you to have access to anything with accommodations or without accommodation. And so we do have a lot of students that are starting to identify in our office, and we are embracing that. There's a lot more to go with it. I think a lot of it is there's still a stigma out there of disability. And that's why we really want to make sure that also in research that you take away some of those stigmas, because people were used as research subjects with disabilities, and they've had some really bad experiences with that. And as history has gone, you know, we've seen that with the Holocaust, we've seen that with a lot of people with disability being used for research, that we want to embrace on their knowledge and what they can contribute. And so that's one thing that I really want to encourage you when you're working with someone that has identified themselves as disability, embrace on them, because they can bring to you a different approach on what they see, and it really allows them to give you a good insight of what they're experiencing or they're challenged with every day.
Great, thank you, Kerry. I do want to let you know that we don't have any additional questions at this time, so perhaps you could address using appropriate terminology and share some of the terminology that is currently used.
Okay, so for example, you know, as time has gone, you know, there are changes in the way that we identify individuals with disability. It's always first person. So you would say a person with a disability or a student with a disability. They are not disabled. That is a term that is still being used quite often. It is a term that a lot of people don't really prefer, is that they'd rather be, you know, I am Kerry with a hearing loss, or Kerry with deafness. And as some of you that do know me, is that I do have a severe to profound hearing loss, and I do rely on lip reading. So my mode of communication may be different than someone that has similar hearing loss, but they may have a whole different way of communicating, but there's nothing different with that. There's not any intellectual disability that's there. It's just the mode of how it is delivered. So someone may want an interpreter, or someone may want to only use a cochlear implant and use a listening device for that. So there's a variety of that. Also, the respect of the person. Ask them how would it be best to address you when I'm talking to you, and they may say, just call me by Kerry. And yes, I do have a hearing loss, but I'm still Kerry. So when you're working with you, when you're interviewing your subjects for this, find out what they prefer. And you may run across someone that will say, you know, I am handicapped. I respect that, but it's not a term that we use anymore. And I will tell them that. I'll say, when you're with me, I will use that, but I will not use that as what I'm doing in general, because it can be offensive to others. And so, for example, we use handicap as a word really only for parking, and it is phasing away from that. It's just accessible parking or accessibility. And I would refuse using that word handicap or disabled. You may just say our population or our researchers are looking into hearing loss, and we are looking for some individuals that do have hearing loss that fall into that are in that category. But remember, they're still a person. And that's the best way I would encourage you for that. Cripple is not a word that's used anymore. A lot of times, if you get ready to do any kind of research and have some questions, please contact us, and we'll be happy to give you kind of a list that's out there that is commonly used. The United Nations has also put out kind of a variety of terms that are used, you know, internationally as well. So if you're doing some kind of research where you're involving other international folks, you may want to make sure that we look into not just the United States, but also to other international services of their terminologies as well.
Thank you, Kerry. Fabulous. Amanda, do you have any tips and tricks to share related to submitting an IRB protocol that you can share for principal investigators?
If you are, absolutely, if you are targeting a population that is has a disability, what the IRB is going to want to see in that application, in that consent form, is that you have an understanding of that population in general. Not to say that everybody with a specific hearing loss or low vision, not to say that every specific person is the same, but just that you have a good understanding of that population and the risks that might be involved with that, and you have a plan to mitigate any risks that that you can reasonably foresee. So this is really what the IRB is going to want to see. And definitely, we're going to want to know that, yeah, that you've thought of anything that could possibly occur, that the language in the consent form is appropriate for that population, that they're, you know, as somebody who is not, I'm not familiar with, you know, the specific jargon or language or terminology that somebody who might be disabled is most comfortable with. So I probably use language, and I'm sure that I do, that would not be appropriate when, and as respectful as possible when speaking with somebody from that population. So it's important to always get Kerry's feedback, contact her office, you know, if you have any questions, just so that you can make sure that you've thought of all of the things, because there are some things that I think most people wouldn't even think about that Kerry can say, hey, no, this you need to do X, Y, or Z to make that just a little bit better.
Thank you, Amanda. We do have a question that just arrived for Kerry. Does the Office of Accessibility offer trainings to learn more about people with special needs in preparation for future research ideas?
That's a good question. We'd be happy to do one for someone that requested that. We would be, you know, we could make it where it could be for whatever that research is. And that was one of the things that we really do want to offer, is that if you are going to be doing research on a special population and want to know more information, reach out to us, and then we can set up a time that we could do some kind of training for you and help also just interview with you, sit down and talk to you about some of your ideas, and also direct you to some of those things. Because sometimes you don't want to put a population at risk for something that maybe it could be changed for a different type of population that you didn't think about. And so we would be happy to do that for anyone on campus that needs some kind of a research assistant. And I know that the IRB, as well as the Office of Research, will be very much in support of that.
Absolutely. We'd be happy to collaborate with you on kicking off any training that is needed or requested. One additional question before we start to close out this Research 411. What are some things researchers and others can do to help break the stigma around disabilities?
The best thing for you to do is, when you're doing any kind of a interview with your subjects, is open it up and say, if there is any accommodation that is in need during this process, please let us know. Because then you've opened that door for there. Also, you know, whatever you put in for your subjects, let them know that, you know, if you're going to be doing a research where it allows for a variety of disabilities to participate, put that in there. Just say, if you do need accommodation, please reach out to us before, you know, such and such date, so that we can make arrangements. Also, you can also put in your language that we will be meeting at such and such. It does have automatic doors. There is accessible parking out front. Those are things that you can start putting in your directions or anything when you're reaching out for subject. When you do that, people recognize that and they see that, and that's an opportunity for them. And any type of specific question, please don't hesitate to contact our office. We'll be more than happy to try to help direct you with what maybe some questions that you have that are specific.
Fantastic. Well, Amanda and Kerry, thank you very much for sharing your time, talent, and resources with us here at Research 411. If you are interested in additional Office of Research events or need additional information, please visit our webpage, research.utdallas.edu. Thank you and have a nice day.